Welcome to the Boys from the South Side. I'm Ben Hardman. We are going to be telling you about the history of the Conard football program from the perspective of the people who were there. It all started back in 1957 when Conard High School officially opened. Before then, everyone in town went to Hall. So the new high school had a mix of new teachers and coaches who came over from Hall. One of them was football coach Bob McKee. He became Conard's first head coach and led the Chieftains for the next 26 years. I asked Coach Ed Leidos, who has been with the Conard football program for 40 years, about McKee's best years leading the program.
With Coach McKee's tenure, my gosh, they won 3 in a row from 70 to 72 as far as league championships are concerned. They went back-to-back in 79 and 80. So, Coach McKee's record, Mr. Hardman, in 27 years was 168 wins, 61 losses, and 15 ties. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to pinpoint an exact time period, but, he had a good run with the program.
Tracy Wilson is West Hartford's town historian. She says that the first football game between Hall and Conard in 1957 must have come with some mixed feelings for the players.
The Hall guys are playing against their former coach. Yeah, so that first game in 1957, you just figure these guys who are seniors had played for 2 seasons with the guys they were going to play against. So I imagine there was a huge amount of motion going into this, not only playing against each other, but Bob McKee, who was the coach at Hall, became the football coach at Conard. So I would think there would have been a real lot of emotion involved in that.
Coach Ed Leidos has heard similar stories about that first game from some of the old players.
I know that the players who transferred over had a hard time, for example, playing the Conard Hall game that first year because those are guys who they won a league championship with 1 year earlier for Hall in 56. So that was very, very hard to play against them when they were on the same side with them, wearing the same uniform 1 year earlier.
Conard won their very first game against Hall on November 10th, 1957, and won 7-0. Conard would go on to become the Central Connecticut Interscholastic League champions with a 4-1 record. From that 1957 season to 1959, William Jelavitz would go on to set the school record of career touchdowns with 25, and in 1959, Craig Nation would go to set the school record for most passing touchdowns scored with 10. As expected, these records have been broken by later generations. Coach Ed Leidos says the McKee-era teams were tough, disciplined, and loaded with talent.
Going back to Coach McKee's era, Gary Castle's class of 64. He was an All-American at Indiana. And he played in the Rose Bowl, I think, against O.J. Simpson, I think in 1967. Jack Calcaterra, class of 62, played at Purdue. He played with Bob Greasy. He blocked for Bob Greasy. There was a guy, Mike Jones, class of 1980. He was a running back, defensive back, good athlete, played at Maryland with Boomer Esiason. So we've had a lot of people come on through here.
When Coach McKee retired in 1983, his longtime assistant and son-in-law Rob Cersosimo took over. The transition took some time. Rob Cersosimo's first 2 seasons as head coach were losing ones. Steve Garneau is the running back coach for Conard and played during the transition.
Well, listen, anytime somebody takes over an organization, they're going to have organizational change. They're going to have new philosophies and new ways of doing things, new practice schedules, new whatever. So our first 2 years, my senior year was a down year. We went 2-9 or 2-8. One of the games was canceled. The year before, I think you might know better than I want to say 500, maybe 4-6. We beat Hall that year, so that was good. And then the year after that, they made it to the playoffs with great players. Mm-hmm. So, there's that change and an organizational change. There's expected to be some bumps in the road. That's kind of what we dealt with. There wasn't a bump in the road of how we felt. There wasn't a bump in the road of how hard we played. There wasn't a bump in the road of what was expected of us. We maybe didn't have the studs that some teams had.
It took Coach Cersosimo 2 losing seasons before he righted the ship. And then the program went on an incredible run.
Okay, so from 87 to 91, Conard football won 4 league championships in 5 seasons. and reached the Class L championship game in 87, lost 7-0 to West Haven in a great ball game.
I spoke to Coach Steve Garneau about the transition from Coach McKee to Coach Cersosimo.
Did you have Coach McKee or Coach Cersosimo?
I played for Coach McKee for 2 years. Now, freshman and sophomore year. So sophomore year, back then, only a few players suited up. It was very rare. So his last year was my sophomore year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, me and my dad were talking about that. We were like, we weren't sure if like you could have had both.
Yeah, so I played for both coaches.
That's awesome. What was Coach McKee like compared to Coach Cersosimo?
Back, like all sports, it doesn't matter what you played, like back in the day, to use the phrase, it was it was one directional. Coaches told you what to do.
Yeah.
And if Coach McKee asked you to do something, it was expected to be done immediately in no uncertain terms. It was expected to be done. So that's one of the major differences between then and now. Yeah. Other than that, coaching was coaching, getting players motivated. They were master motivators. He and Coach C Senior, you wanted to work for those guys. It was great. And they had the kids' best interest in heart. If you were part of that program, you were always part of something special. When you played Conard football in the 60s, 70s, 80s, when you played against them, people circled the dates because of Hall of Fame coaches like Coach McKee and Coach Cersosimo both. I was very lucky to play for both.
Even though Coach McKee was retired, he did plenty of coaching from the stands as a spectator. In an October 1984 article in the Hartford Courant, columnist Owen Canfield caught McKee at a game in Simsbury.
Forgive spectator Bob McKee if now and then he behaves like a coach. He was one for the first 27 years that Conard had a football team. He retired after last season, and Bob Cersosimo, McKee's son-in-law, stepped in. At last week's Simsbury-Conard game in Simsbury, McKee stood on the back bench of the visitors' bleachers, chatting with friends and being Mr. Cool. He appeared detached as Conard fell behind 28-0. He showed no outward signs of pleasure when the Chieftains pulled to 28-13 at halftime. If he was crestfallen when Simsbury went ahead 35-13, nobody knew it. But then Conard began a comeback that made this a terrific high school game. As the team drove in the final minutes for the score that would make it a one-point game, Mr. Cool was yelling. "My heart's in my mouth," he confided, and then he bellowed to the referee after an incomplete pass, "Hey, the clock, stop the clock. Oh my, they lost 7 seconds off the clock." There are active coaches and inactive coaches, but there's no such animal as a retired coach.
You may wonder, how different were the offensive plays used by Coach McKee and later Coach C compared to today? Here's Coach Leidos.
Very different, because it was all run-oriented. If you go back and look at the stats from Coach McKee's tenure, 57 to 83, sometimes you might have a quarterback with 208 yards passing for the season. And sometimes we have quarterbacks do that in one game. So it was really run-oriented. There was a tenure, to be honest with you, from 1998 until 2000, I'll say 2, where we threw the ball a lot more. We had Justin Hardison throw for almost 1,000 yards in 98. Michael McGilpin was 31 yards shy of 1,000 in 99. John Kashak went over 1,000 for the first time in program history in 2001. And then the other couple of years, the quarterbacks had like 700 yards or so, which is pretty good for Conard football at that time.
P.J. Foley was a former coach and a current teacher at Conard who played a valuable role in Chieftain history. Foley led Conard to a 6-4 record as a quarterback in 1990. I asked him what it was like to be a quarterback in the Power I offense.
Yeah, it was simple, in the sense that, there was, our plays were numbered, and it was either right or left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 10. We created a play 9 for the Hall game, which, worked very well, but the vast majority of what we ran was 3 or 4 different plays. And as far as the quarterback's concerned, I still know to this day, and, most quarterbacks do know this in their offense. I knew everybody's job on every single play.
In fact, the Power Eye is the focus of a Hartford Courant article on November 22nd, 1987, after Conard beat Hall 16-12 to make it to the state Class L game. Ed Leidos remembers that game.
So we're 9-0. Hall was 8-1. They had won 8 in a row. This is for the league championship and a trip to the state playoffs, the championship game. And Hall came on in. Coach C had me waiting for Hall to let them into the gym where they would meet with Coach Robinson. They came in the gym, and back then, the cheerleaders would decorate the locker room. The coach's office, the team rooms were decorated with signs, other decorations, and Hall came in, and they tore everything down. He was so upset. His pregame talk was all around that. And Matt Cersosimo can vouch that back in the days, when there was no weight room in the upper deck, that was all bleachers. And that was wide open. There was no wall. So he's up there as a 9-year-old kid with his mom because his mom was the cheer coach. And they're getting some stuff for the kids, the girls. And Matt hears his dad at decibel level number 10, just firing the kids up about they came on in, they tore down our locker room and blah, 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 blah. And the kids went out and won 16-12, but that 4-point win felt like it was a 20-point win because there was no doubt in that game who was in control.
I asked Coach Leidos what made Rob Cersosimo a Hall of Fame coach.
Hard work, love the kids, intense. He would get on you, but the kids understood for the most part who he was, and they were able, for the most part, to deal with that. Of course, those are lessons that you can look back upon finally and understand what he was trying to get at when you're 25, 30 years old compared to being 16, 17. But for me, his work ethic is what I took from him as a coach. His ability to prepare teams. I think he was the ultimate preparer as far as coaches are concerned that I've been around. He was phenomenal.
I asked Mr. Foley about his most memorable moment during his years as a Conard football player. As you might guess, it was a Hall game his senior year.
We had a rough start to our senior season. We went 0-3. Myself and another senior quarterback were rotating back and forth. And then after that third game, I kind of had like a breakthrough performance that gave Coach C and the rest of the coaches, I imagine, a little bit more confidence. And it was in week 3. And then we went on this tear after being 0-3. We won 5 of the next 6 games. Only dropping 1 game to Glastonbury 7-0. And then going into the Hall game, the winner was going to win the conference. And, they were on a roll. I think they were 8-1 at the time. Or no, maybe it was 7-2 going into that game. We came out, third play of the game, scored a touchdown on a 50-yard rip. Defense shut them down, and we got another touchdown, and they scored eventually, but then we extended the lead, and coming away with that 34-6 was probably the pinnacle of my high school career anyway.
Through the 90s and into the 2000s, Coach Cersosimo cranked out winning season after winning season. In 2009, 2010, and 2011, Conard not only won the league title, they went to the state playoffs. I talked to Cole Stabnick, class of 2014, about his time as a Conard football player. By the end of his time as a Chieftain, Cole held the school records for most receptions in one season with 63, the most touchdown receptions in one season with 10, second most receiving yards in a season with 574 yards, and the most receptions in a game with 12. Stabnick was a junior when Rob Cersosimo retired as head coach, handing over the job to his son, Matthew Cersosimo. He mentioned the positive change he experienced from mostly being a blocker, as the offense ran a power I majority of the games, to going out for passes a lot more often.
So it went from my junior year, we ran the ball 95% of the time, and it was working for the handful of years, though, because we just had so many stud running backs before that. And then once Coach Mack came over, he was working at UConn before as the quarterbacks coach, and then he came over and he brought over more of like a spread offense. So as like a tight end and got to play a little bit of kind of just in the slot as well. My senior year, I was lucky enough where it was like our first year. And I think it was like the first year since Coach Matt himself played at Conard where they actually really started to implement any type of like passing offense. So with that, the bar was kind of low for the for the record. So I was able to like yeah, set a few that senior year just from that like switch over.
Yeah, awesome.
But it was a ton of fun getting to kind of play for both of those guys, and Coach Matt like just brought a different level there coming from UConn.
I asked Stabnick what his go-to play was.
I'm not going to be able to tell you by name here, but I think like my favorite route was just hitting like anytime we get it within the like kind of goal line, just hitting like a stick route, just like the slant and back out. And we had a pretty mobile quarterback at the time, Ryan Bell. So he would always roll out and either like, he was like built like a line. I think he actually went on to play linebacker in college. So he would either like tuck and run or just find me on a little stick route, which was the go-to within the goal line. So that was always a good one.
That's dope. What was your like glory year?
I would definitely my senior year, like junior year, it's high school. So I was like still growing into my body. So junior year, I was like started on JV, and then that was like preseason. I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I can do this for a year, and then ended up just like doing special teams and just kind of coming in for just like block, like kind of 2 tight end blocking plays my junior year. And then like when senior year happened, I kind of like really tried to work out in the off season and take it more seriously. And then just had an absolute blast senior year because it just shifted from, especially as a tight end or as any, we were just running more fun offense. So I think like senior year was an absolute blast.
Despite the Chieftains going 4-6 in 2014, Cole Stabnick had a senior season most football players only dream of. I asked him about his most memorable game that year.
We played them at home at Conard, and it was kind of chippy early on. We always like to have fun with it, talking a little smack, and I got like kind of hit with a cheap shot early on, and then I think we ended up scoring like 3 unanswered touchdowns against them. So I think that was like the one that comes to my mind. And then we played Hall our senior year and kind of got smacked by them, but I had like a goal my whole season of getting 10 touchdowns, and on the final drive there, we got a garbage time touchdown. So
that's awesome.
That was, at least personally, it was all right, but it didn't make the loss that much better.
My team holds a very special place in my town and in the West Hartford community. Our team traditions will never see an end, and the legacies of what was left on the field will always remain. I asked all of the former players that I interviewed what words come to mind when they think of the legacy of Conard football.
Winning. I think of intensity. I think of pride. I think of hard work. I think those are 3 or 4 words that come to my mind off the top of my head.
So I think respect, regardless of our past few years and the records that we have, when you speak of Conard football and you speak of it in the state, people know the quality of coaching and the quality of kids and the quality of programming that we get. But the standards have always been the standards in terms of this is the expectation and meet the expectation. So I think, expectations, pride in what we do, I think those characteristics really exemplify what we're all about and how we do it.
When I think about the Conard football program, a couple of things that come to mind would be tough, hard-nosed, brotherhood.
Integrity, commitment, doing the right thing. Those would be the ones that come first and foremost.
A special thank you to Coach Ed Lidos, Coach Steve Garneau, Mr. Foley, and Cole Stabnick, as well as West Hartford town historian Tracy Wilson. I'm Ben Hardman. Thank you for listening to Boys from the South Side. Go Conard!